Oxford from the inside. The good, the bad, but always the truth. Hi, I'm Abbie, and welcome to this episode of Oxford from the Inside. The good, the bad, but always the truth. Today we are joined by Michael. Would you like to introduce yourself, Michael?
Hi everyone. So my name is Michael, and I'm about to go into my second year studying French and Spanish at St. Peter's, so the same college as Abbie.
The best college. So welcome, Michael. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today. And today we will actually be talking about how to write a personal statement for French and Spanish. So it's gonna be fun. So let's get started, shall we? So, Michael, what is studying French and Spanish like at Oxford, and do you enjoy your degree?
That's a big question. I think in the terms of the actual like layout of the degree, so in like an average week, we might have a couple of lectures for each language, as well as maybe 2 hours of grammar classes and speaking classes. And as well as that, we also have two tutorials normally a week. So I'll have one which is more literature based, where we might be discussing the text that we've kind of read over the previous week, or we'll be going over like a translation. So we'll be kind of looking like in depth at the language, making sure like you maybe haven't mistranslated any of like the nuances. And so I find them actually quite interesting because normally you would think that translation is maybe quite simple and that there isn't that much doubt, but actually it's a lot more complicated when you get into the more literary texts. Um, so yeah, overall, although it can be stressful sometimes, I've actually really enjoyed my degree, and I can imagine picking another subject.
No, that sounds really good. And to be fair, like I think you sometimes people get confused when they're considering different languages, and they think, oh, mate, it's just you just spend day in day out just speaking the language. But like you say, from what you said, there's translations. You're reading different books. You're listening to the way that people speak. Like there seems to be quite a lot of aspects to the degree, and it actually sounds really interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I wish I could
think,
speak the languages.
yeah, I think um, the only one thing that I'd like to do more is actually speak the language, because in Oxford, obviously, you're limited the amount of time you're actually speaking it, because you might only have an hour of like speaking classes each week. But I think over the year abroad, you're able to like recover that lost time. So over like the whole course of the degree, you'll definitely end up fluent, and obviously that is the main perk of the degree.
Definitely, yeah. You'll have a great time on your year abroad. I'm so
Yeah,
jealous
yeah,
you'll be going to France and Spain. Like, what a
I know.
dream.
Yeah, there's a lot of options as well. This is South America, Canada, the
Blow
opposite
my
end.
mind. Okay, so basically, like on a scale of 1 to 10, then with one being like really, really easy, and then 10 being like pretty hard, pretty difficult. How tough would you say applications for French and Spanish are? And like, why do you say that?
Um, I think it's difficult because I don't think there is any easy application. um, but I guess specifically to Oxford, I'd say maybe around like a seven. So quite quite difficult. Just in the sense that I think the A level and the degree is quite a big jump. So it's quite hard to prepare yourself for it. Especially because Oxford is such like a literature based language degree. Um, at A level, you might be studying maybe one text and one film, and then by the time to get to Oxford, you might be doing um, maybe four books in one term. So I guess, and that might be for each language. So the amount of literature that you do read does go up quite a bit. But I think that once you start getting into reading it and getting used to reading maybe in French and Spanish, then you get a better sense of like what characteristics come with different periods of literature, and you kind of get a better trained eye when you're reading. Um, I think that's kind of the most enjoyable part, because what might seem strange and like exotic was actually normal in France at that time. And that's like the different perspectives that you get with reading literature, I think.
That sounds really interesting, actually. Like how you develop a like an appreciation almost for the way that the language is adapted. It's almost kind of like linguistics, isn't it? Almost. Um,
Yeah, I guess I guess linguistics is more like the study of language, which is another really interesting
yeah.
part of the course, which you can choose actually in your like second and third year, as even if you just do two languages, you can choose modules in it, or you can choose it as a whole another section of your degree. But the study of language is definitely something which is quite complex and more interesting than it initially seems.
I suppose it's good to have that broad variability in your degree so that I suppose you can specialize in the things that you're really interested in, which is obviously why we take a degree. um,
Yeah,
and you also mentioned how, as soon as there's a big gap between, A level and then coming to university. And I think you mentioned how you sort of almost you just change and you sort of adapt. And I think that adaptability is so important. And that is something I know people are afraid to sort of bridge that gap almost before coming to university, but you do adapt. And I mean, I'm sure you totally agree with me that it's just something that just happens. You just almost like you change overnight.
yeah. I mean, you have to go outside your comfort zone a little
Yeah.
bit sometimes, but I think in the end it does do you well. And I think the tutors normally are aware that they do try and help you out more at the beginning, just to ease you in. Um, and I felt like, especially at the start, they were really helpful in kind of getting you used to like looking at new texts and like how you would go about analyzing them before they then kind of let you go out and explore your own interests maybe in later years. So I think it isn't like one massive jump. They still do try and guide you a little bit through those steps.
Yeah, that's good. It's nice the way they sort of wean you in, but yeah, it's chill. Like, don't worry about coming to Oxford and just having everything thrown at you at once. Everyone's in the same boat, and you can always ask students older than you as well. So onto the personal statement. So how did you go about writing a personal statement? Like, was there any specific structure you adopted to your personal statement?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I don't know many people that actually like going about writing personal statements, but I guess once you kind of get into it, it's never as complicated as it might seem. I think from the very start, I think the best thing is to do was I think I just wrote everything down that I'd done that was related to French and Spanish. So maybe books I'd read, films I've watched. I think I also did a few like extracurricular stuff. So I was teaching French at primary school when I was in my sixth forms, so which I quite enjoyed. So it's quite funny, but um, kind of little things like that are quite nice to add in there to give you like a bit more of a personal touch. Um, and then I think after that, it's quite easy for me to organize it because I could obviously split paragraphs between French and Spanish, so that wasn't too complicated. But um, I think within that, I also tried to group maybe different texts I'd read or films into certain genres. So if I'd read like 18th century literature, I'd probably explain maybe two or three books that I'd read there. And then I'd also, at the time, I'd read more like existentialism books, which are slightly more modern than the 18th century. So then I kind of talked about that afterwards. I think because the personal statement is also quite short, it's quite nice to give it like a more succinct structure by linking things together, so you're not wasting words in between.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And it's quite interesting to hear how you did structure it because having done a few like personal statement interviews now, it's quite cool to see like some people just say, oh no, I just talked about everything that I did, boom, that was done. Whereas you sort of split it down by the sort of different aspects of the degree or by genre. And I know some people split it down by the subjects that they did. So it's actually quite cool to see how you did it. And I'd say that, for languages, I think you're the most different from everyone else. But that's good though, because it clearly it worked for you. So well
Yeah,
done.
I mean, there's no set way to write a
Yeah.
language personal statement, but um, I think it depends kind of how you've been reading before. It just happened that I really enjoyed like the kind of books I was reading, like the 18th century, and then I started reading more of that genre, and that way it fit well together in the statement. But there'll be no harm in reading five completely like different books that have no relevance to each other, and that will still be as valuable as reading similar ones of the same genre. As long as you enjoy it, I think that is the main thing to show, because then you'll be able to like write and speak about it more passionately.
Yeah, definitely. I think just throughout the personal statement, you have to show your enthusiasm and your passion and your enjoyment for the subject because you're doing it for 4 years. You don't want to be, slogging away for those 4 years, just or 3 or 4 years, just like absolutely just despising your degree. So it's really important that you show that enthusiasm because that's what the tutor's really looking for. So do quite like an important question, I think. Do French and Spanish applicants need work experience beforehand?
Yeah, so I think I guess work experience for French and Spanish is more like traveling to the country, but um, I think from my experience, the tutor said like you don't need and you could never have gone to France or Spain before, and your application will be no less stronger than someone that's maybe been there like 3 or 4 times. I think obviously going to France and Spain would be great, but I think that obviously everyone doesn't always have that opportunity, so they would never like discriminate against someone that hasn't had the chance to do that. Um, I think I said earlier about like little things I've done by like working like primary school, or maybe I think I went to a few like film study days where like the whole day was more like a conference, like looking at and going over like a certain film in Spanish. I think if you have like things like that, like your conferences you've been to, they can be like really nice additions, and you don't necessarily have to have gone to the country because in the degree everyone will go there, so they're not looking for someone that's fluent in French or Spanish. I think that is a massive perception of every like student that maybe when they come here they're already completely fluent in the language, and I know that my French and Spanish is not completely perfect, um, and so they don't expect that either. So it's not something you need to worry about as long as you're like pursuing interests, and that can be done very easily in England. Obviously, with COVID, everything's online anyway, so we're making do with just trying to find any opportunity we can.
No, that's a really, really good point to make that you shouldn't expect to be a complete expert when you come to university because at the end of the day, you're taking your degree to learn more about the subject. So, you don't have to be some like French genius, Spanish genius and be able to just like it all out in like an interview or something like that. You can just honestly like don't worry, yeah, basically don't worry if that you're maybe for your interview you probably read I'm guessing they probably give you a text that you have to read and translate. Is that something which happens or
um yeah, it depends. I think in the interview, sometimes they like you to read out. Basically at the start we normally have to look at a text. They give you like half an hour beforehand. It might be a piece of poetry or a piece of prose, and you basically have to analyze it in like half an hour. And sometimes they do get you to read out the passage in French or Spanish just so they can like hear you speak the language. But I think um, even if it's not just like testing like how you're speaking it, it's more just maybe to ease you in slightly, and it's not like a massive test if your accent's not perfect. And at the end of the interview, there might be maybe 5 minutes of questions where you're actually speaking French or Spanish, but it might just be if you like, they might ask you if you've ever been to France before, or like if you haven't, where would you like to go? It's not normally it's nothing too like intense, and I think the fact that it is only like 5 minutes shows that it's not like the be all and end all if that part doesn't go perfectly.
yeah, that's good. And yeah, so like we said, just don't worry about being able to speak it fluently because you come into uni to learn it all. Um so so I was just wondering like for well, French and Spanish in particular, like what what are some good supercurricular resources that people could sort of look into, like both sort of focused on, with COVID being here, but also like what you could do when there's no COVID as well.
Yeah, I think the best part about doing like extracurricular stuff in French or like in languages in general is that it's stuff you can just incorporate into like your daily life. So personally, I just like reading, say like reading newspapers in French or Spanish. So like, examples like I often read like Le Monde in French or El País in Spanish. Um, I think also even if it's like simple things like listening to French or Spanish music, or even watching Netflix shows that are in French or Spanish, everything just listening to the language can help, and it can also be like very enjoyable. Um, but I think for more like technical aspects, I think it's always good to be able to like focus on your grammar. I think before for the entrance exam for languages, like the actual exam is very grammar based, and to like have a good grounding in that. Normally, like an A level book will suffice, but there are often like lots of online language learning websites which can be really useful. Um, and I think as well, you can also you can also like find PDF copies of like literature online, and I've actually been doing that a lot recently because we haven't had the libraries open. And often, if you just search a PDF copy of the French or Spanish book that you wanted to read, it's really easy to find them. So I think that there are like a lot of options out there, and you just have to try and find what interests you. And I guess even if it doesn't and you don't really like it, you don't have to read the whole book. You can try and sift through what you like and what you don't. And it's more of just everyone's kind of on this journey where you're trying to find your niche and what you enjoy best.
Yeah, like it's really important to note that, to be honest, anything you do which could be sort of almost remotely related to your degree is a supercurricular. Like, I did something which was sort of distinctly related to learning about waves, and how waves form, transverse and longitudinal waves and stuff. And I just sort of linked that to seismic waves in earthquakes and stuff. So it's, yeah, like you said, you can literally find any resources, and if you think they're useful, you get something from it, you make your own interpretations, you and it leads you to maybe look into something else, then that is so invaluable, and that is something you can 100% put on your personal statement.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that often people like to study something that they think the tutors will like, but the tutors don't necessarily want you to have the same like specific interest as them. It's just they want you to find what's ever best for you, and while you're at university, they then help you further that interest. Or at Oxford, you also have the luxury of like maybe they send you to another tutor that happens to be a specialist in that subject. So you're never prejudiced against for not having like exactly same interest as your tutor. Like you should always go for what you want to do.
No, definitely. Like, and that's a good point actually, because I remember talking to my sister, and she said that when she had her interview, she knew beforehand who the tutor was going to be interviewing her, and she actually like researched what the tutor's like interests were, and it was some big like weird biochemical thing, and my sister was like, nah, like if she starts talking about this subject, I'm done, I'm gone. But luckily, like, she didn't. Like, the
Yeah.
tutors know what you've put in your personal statement, they know sort of what you'll have done in your A levels, so they'll ask those things as like a baseline, and then sort of push you out of your comfort zone, but they'll never ask you about something completely, just like absurd and just something that you've never come across before. um so I was just thinking, so you've been doing French and Spanish for a year now. So I mean, for a whole year, I mean, so I was just thinking, like, what would you say would be the most invaluable skills to sort of put down your personal statement, to show for doing a French and Spanish degree then?
Yeah, so I think for particularly for like an Oxford application, you do have to show like a willingness to like engage with the literature. I think I've said that a lot, but it is true that we do quite a lot of it, and that does form the main basis of the literature side of the degree. So even for people like starting languages from scratch, if you had a chance to engage with like a few books, they're not looking for you to suddenly be literature expert before you come as well, but um, just like an interest. And I think in your personal statement, if you could show evidence maybe that you've kind of gone beyond just like a quick skim read and you've actually engaged with the text and can maybe write like a sentence which is quite interesting that might like probe the tutor's thoughts. So everyone could maybe look at Wikipedia and write kind of what the book's about, but actually writing something that shows that you have engaged with the text would be, I think, something that would stand out. And if you could maybe link it with other things you may have seen in the past, I know um, one thing I found quite interesting was this 18th century book by Voltaire, which is called Traité sur la tolérance, which means Treaty on Tolerance. um, and it actually, when there was the Charlie Hebdo attacks in France, um, it actually came back to like a number one bestseller because obviously it's talking about tolerances again, and that was obviously written 200 years ago, and now it's coming back into a bestseller. And I found that quite interesting at the time. So if you can find those like small little links, I find that it can just make your personal statement like a little more interesting.
Yeah, that's really good, because yeah, like you said, I feel like it's good if you can find those little, almost like almost like a little niche almost, which is it actually has a lot of relevance and is something that that you can link lots of different things into. And like you said, how you're reading something, making inferences, and then you know picking up stuff from that, maybe that you've read in the past or that you've seen in the past or heard in the past is also really a really good skill to have, because at the end of the day, when you come to your finals in your degree, you're going to be having to like just think of the whole degree as what you've learned for the whole 3 or 4 years. So no, that's a really good skill to have, and like you said, engaging with the text and stuff is such an important skill, I'd definitely say, for languages. So I was just a little bit curious, maybe just going slightly over to the interviews now. Did your tutors actually refer to your personal statement a lot in your interviews, or was it more focused on your written work that you submit?
Um, so for all my interviews, I think the personal statement did come up, um, and I don't think I went over the written work either. So I would say definitely like the personal statement is probably something that they will bring up, just because I think it's quite hard to expand upon any like books in your personal statement. So they might want to pick up on one or two and like try and expand that further. Um, and I think it is a really good time to show like your interest and like showing that you have maybe read a bit beyond, like a bit of more like the what the maybe literary critics are writing about it, or more importantly like your own thoughts, and like what you think about it is almost more valuable than maybe what somebody else has written about it. So I think it's definitely important to make sure that you have read the books pretty thoroughly before, because there is always someone that does maybe get caught out about a book that they might not have read properly, and then someone bring it up in an interview, because that would probably be the worst case scenario. So it's best to know the books that you have written down on your personal statement quite well, um, just so in case they do bring it up, you want to be able to have some like insightful comments.
Yeah, that's perfect. Like that's so important as well, because like if you go into an interview having said that you've read a book and then you haven't, and they start asking you questions about it, that's going to reflect so badly on you, because it almost shows a lack of interest in the subject, and that is not something you want to convey. So like you said, don't be the person who just sort of reads the synopsis on Wikipedia and hopes for the best. Like if you're going to put a book down in your personal statement, do try read it, do try and, as you said, really engage with the text, and also like you said, focus on the grammar as well, because I think you said that the test has a lot to do with grammar. So
Yeah, the test is definitely something you can prepare for. I know that more like aptitude test, but um, if you're starting a new language, then the actual test it's more like a made up language, and you're like spotting patterns. And so I think you can practice that, but it's a bit harder to prepare for. But in terms of the actual languages that you've done before, um, they're definitely something that you can practice, and just refining on some grammar points that are likely to come up. So normally it might be prepositions or like subjunctive, or just little things that always kind of catch you out. They like to bring up every now and again.
that sounds quite cool. I think it's nice that even if you've got a very sort of baseline knowledge of the subject, you can still succeed quite well in the tests, as long as you've got like a good grasp on your spelling, your punctuation, your grammar. So I was just thinking, we're sort of drawing to like the end now. So I was wondering if you could just like give some general tips to prospective students about applying to sort of Oxford in general, but also for French and Spanish degree.
Yeah, I think if we're supposed to do the whole process again, I think often the application process can seem like quite a chore, and it kind of drags on a little bit. And I think um, the whole point of like reading around the subjects is that it is something that you will be doing later, and in that sense, you should try and enjoy it as much as possible. And obviously, it can be quite stressful, but when you are reading different things, really just trying to actually enjoy like reading them, and um, realizing that like what you're doing is actually like quite interesting, because now you're like fully in control of what you're doing. There's no necessary syllabus that you have to follow. You're literally following like what you want to do, and I think that is like the most important part, because the personal statement is where you can be as personal and like yourself as possible. And your best self does come out, because if you're just trying to say that you find 15th century French literature like the best thing you've ever read, but actually you hate it, it's going to be hard to convince the tutor that you do when they start probing questions. So um, really like following your interests and making sure, I guess, that you give kind of the best, like 100% of what you've got to do, because um, your application is never going to be perfect, even if you spend hours and hours longer. You always might think there's like something else you could do, but at that moment in time, you've probably given it like your best shot. And if you've done that, then you can't really be upset with like the final result.
Yeah, that's, I could have said it better myself, to be fair. Yeah, like you said, like Oxford is not the be all and end all. And no matter where you end up, you're gonna absolutely love your degree. You're gonna absolutely love your university. And yeah, you can't have a perfect application. And you also mentioned how like you can like focus on like things which you are interested in. I feel like it's good to show like a broad appreciation for the degree as a whole, but then you can always like talk about the things which you are interested in. So try and convey that broad appreciation, but then yeah, do specialize. Like you said, if you hate 15th century literature, just maybe be like, yeah, I read a bit about this and this led me to read about this which I am actually interested in. So
I mean, it's often like more of like a journey. Like you might read something and say like, oh, I preferred this, and actually that made me study another book that was quite similar. And then I think that's quite a nice way to create like a thread through your statement, because you're almost seeing like the journey you took, because everyone has a slightly unique way of accessing it. And so if you can create like your own journey and the tutor can also see that, then um, you'll be able to like almost have like more relationship, and like they'll be able to understand like your thoughts closer from like the outset, because um it's perfectly valid to say that, oh, maybe I didn't like this as much as something else, because the tutor doesn't always like every book they read either. And that doesn't mean that you don't like French literature as a whole. We all have like our unique interests.
yeah, that's really good. And like you said, just trying to convey that journey of thought, that journey of consideration. I feel like it's something that even the tutors go through. They're still going through it now. Like that's what learning is about. And I think, yeah, just trying to show those links and how you developed on your thoughts is something that you do constantly throughout your Oxford degree, especially in tutorials. So yeah, that's a very, very good point to make. So that's all we have time for today. We've learned some really, really cool and interesting stuff about French and Spanish at Oxford. Here's me thinking it was just speaking the language, but no, there's some literature, there's some history, there's some grammar. Like, whew, I'm blown away.
It's not just literature. I mean, it is, but you gain more from it than just that.
Yeah, it sounds really cool. So yeah, thank you so much, Michael, for sharing your experiences with us and for joining us on Oxford from the Inside. So yeah, also thank you to our followers for listening to this podcast and or for just watching this video. And also remember to follow us on Instagram. Our Instagram handle is at Oxford from the Inside, no spaces. And also check out our Facebook page for more or like regular updates on our new content. And also to access our stuff, just type in Oxford from the Inside on Facebook, Spotify, YouTube, Twitter, you name it, we're on it. So I hope you all stay safe and well. And until next time, bye.